And so at the end of the day, though, I remember like, oh my God, am I ever going to get married? And I had that mindset. But then the way it happened and the way it's transpired in our life is we were doing God's will together, didn't even realize it. And it was like we're in the right circles. And I think that's the same thing with anything related to purpose. Right. Like, I don't search out my purpose. I don't search out my marriage. I don't wonder about, I live God's purpose daily. And by the end of my life, I'm like, wow. Welcome back to the Good Life Podcast, where we talk about the search for significance, the pursuit of purpose, and the challenges of our culture. I'm your host, Carl Nichols, and I'm here with our student pastor, Pastor Daniel Foster. Welcome back. We're excited as we're talking specifically about purpose this entire month, and which is really one of the three things we say we talk about on this podcast.
Yes.
So how's the new year treating you?
It's new.
It's new.
It's been good. It's been a great year. I feel refreshed and kind of a good mindset going into the year, excited for what the year has for us and grateful for what the previous year gave us. So
we came off the new year, and we always take and shut down, and this offends some people, but we shut down the last week of the year going into the new year because our staff and our volunteers run. Mm-hmm. And we believe in rest. We believe in, sabbaticals, and it's a great opportunity. 'Cause, listen, people do come to church on New Year's, or do come to church on certain times of Christmas, but we gather people together. We celebrate the goodness of God. We celebrate the birth of Jesus, and then we rest and get prepared for the next year. And I'll say for me, it's one of the greatest times of my life because I'm ready to go when January comes. And unfortunately, some of our staff are sick and various things, but hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully you're off to a great start this new year. I know this podcast has been very impactful. This series we're in at Relevant Church called Life's Toughest Questions has been very impactful. And so today I want to pick up. Last time we gave you 3 prayers to pray to kind of understand God's purpose. And we talked specifically about purpose being living your life for God's purposes every day by serving his people. And the three things, I won't go into them. You can listen to the podcast the last episode that we dropped. But 3 things that you pray in the morning and you evaluate at night, 5 to 10 minutes of your time. It'll be a game changer as you start down this journey of living out, not just finding. You don't find God's purpose, you live out God's. You don't find God's purpose for your life or your purpose. You live out God's purposes in your generation. Is what we're talking about. But along the way,
hide and seek with his purpose.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. It's almost like the marriage. Like, who's the one I'm supposed to marry? Well. Maybe if you just kind of put yourself in the right circles and you start doing the right things, you'll go, hey, I like you, you like me, and then you get married one day. And so that's what happened. I know for Julie and I, was like, we were in church together, serving in student leadership together, and it was like, hey, girl, it's kind of that thing. But versus like trying to, and even still, in that season of life, I was a very lonely, only child, and still am, and not lonely, but only. And so at the end of the day, though, I remember like, oh my God, am I ever going to get married? And I had that mindset. But then the way it happened and the way it's transpired in our life is we were doing God's will together, didn't even realize it. And it was like we're in the right circles. And I think that's the same thing with anything related to purpose. Right. Like, I don't search out my purpose. I don't search out my marriage. I don't wonder about, I live God's purpose daily. And by the end of my life, I'm like, wow. And so the number one question we got last year when we did a survey is, what's God's will for my life? What's God's purpose for my life? And I would just simply say this before we jump in today, is there's two kind of components of God's will or God's purpose that they're not in the notes. We didn't even talk about this before we came live, but like, you have God's general will, God's general purpose for all humanity. First of all, that we may come to know Christ and that we may serve him with our life and that we may serve daily his people. We've talked a lot about God's general will.
Yes.
Then there's God's specific will. So specific will, listen, you can't fulfill God's specific will until you learn to live out God's general will.
Right.
And so as a specific will for me, I'm specifically called to be a pastor of a church and lead. That's my calling, so to speak. The problem is the phone doesn't ring on my calling till I'm obedient today.
Yes.
And so we're waiting for the phone to ring and go, okay, God, we're ready. And he's like, no, you're not ready. Because if I sent you there today, you weren't even faithful in the little things. Yeah. So faithful in God's general will, God's general purpose has such an impact on God's long-term calling for your life. And that's what everybody's asking, really, is like, what's God calling me to do? What's God's will for my life? Well, today he's calling you to do this. And when you're faithful in this, watch what happens in the future. But if you're not only is God, I ended the last podcast by saying, every week you're not serving God's people, specifically through your local church, but also throughout. The enemy's robbing you robbing you of a week of your purpose.
Yeah.
And that's like, okay, well, I'll get that back. No, you're kicking the can down the road on your calling
Right.
too. And so,
Right.
anyway, that's some side note.
That's good. And you just sparked something in my thought process of we want to know the grand purpose
Absolutely.
for our life. God's like, let's just start small. I'll speak to churchgoers. We want to travel across the world to go on mission trips. But how often do we travel to our prayer closet?
Yeah, or even to our neighbors next door.
Or to our neighbors, or to church in our own neighborhood. And we want to make a huge difference. We want to make this huge impact, but we don't want to do the small things to get there.
If I could tell you, like, look, you go over here and you get to experience the joy of all this big impact you're having, but like going and just praying for your neighbor, going and serve. I think, look, we can talk about marriage in another podcast, and we'll get there, but I think there's just so much. We can say at 17 years old, 20 years old, young adults, 25, one day I want to be married and have a family, and here's how many kids I want to have, and I want to live this, and you got this big vision of your future, but you don't even love yourself now.
Ooh.
You don't love yourself now, and you don't love Jesus now, and you haven't learned to love others now, so you're somehow going to be a good wife or a good husband.
You're not leading yourself well right now, so how are you going to lead a spouse or a family one day?
Yep. So let's talk about that. Along the way, as we start jumping in, so this is a 3 things podcast, and we always put top 3 things. These are just our top 3. There's probably 20 others that other people would say are top, but today we're going to give you 4. So it's the top 3 plus
Changing
1.
things up a little bit.
So really, what these are people in this picture of your purpose. So if you think about purpose being, what does this frame look like? What does the picture of your purpose look like? There are people along the way that you come in contact with. And what I've learned, as you live out God's general purpose for your life, serving and loving others and serving his people, and you start to understand God's calling for your life, and you start living out that calling on maybe a more complete scale, or a more where people go, man, how did you get there? Like, for example, I didn't become a pastor in a day. Like, I served. I told a story in church, and you told a story similar last time on our podcast. I started out at 11 years old. I came to know Christ, and at 12 years old, I was a clown in kids ministry.
Do you have pictures of this?
I probably do.
Can you please?
And so I
find it and show us.
The crazy part about clowns is they're like creepy today, but back then kids loved them. And so I was a clown. Now let me paint a picture for you before we jump into this. I'm a preteen boy going through puberty, breaking out in acne, painting my face with clown makeup once a week. That's
hilarious.
And wondering why I got pimples all over the place. Why I can't keep my face clean. Why does it what's going on? And so I didn't start out preaching to thousands of people. Right. That didn't happen. Like, it started with like painting your face and antibacterial soap, getting it off. That's the call of God. That's today. I will credit back to the obedience when I was 12.
And you sharing that, you shared that with our staff recently, and it jarred a memory in me. My first time serving, I was on the puppet team.
Yeah, and I did puppets.
I had to audition the puppet team with a cassette tape. It was a Beverly Hillbilly theme song, but it was rewritten to be like a Christian tune. And so I remember
we just lost all of our listeners.
I forgot about that, but I remember being in the front of the mirror and just practicing. So get back to your clown.
Yeah, but like that was kids ministry back then.
I was probably 10.
Some of our 25-year-old listeners are going, well, we're never going to follow anything they say again. But listen to me. Like, you'll look back and you'll go, oh my gosh, I can't believe we did that when we were 25 or when we were 15.
It was cheesy, but a step towards where we're at now.
Yeah, and so like the reality is, I remember getting up. I remember my clown outfit to this day. And I remember painting my face. I had to learn to paint my own face on Sunday mornings. And you think getting kids to church is hard. I had to paint my own face at 12. So make fun if you want.
I can't stop laughing.
But the reality is without that obedience in that day of serving God's people, generally in that moment, taking advantage of that opportunity, so many people are waiting on a platform.
Right.
And you know what? Here's what I love about those moments in my life. The hard things, I can stand on God's word and say, I did that.
Yeah.
I was faithful in that. I believe in that. And then challenge people to do it along the way. And we got people every single week that say, I want God's specific purpose, specific calling, big plan, but I'm not willing to do the little things. So do the little things first. And then as you do the little things, you'll start to see God's hand open up. You've been faithful. Let me show you something else.
Yes.
You've been faithful. Let me show you something else. And so as you start to see the future unfold and that position, platform, opportunity, business, whatever, following, whatever it is where you go, now I feel like I'm really making a difference on a bigger scale, you're going to run into 4 types of people. along the way. And we're going to look at Joseph's life really briefly. I'm not going to go into much detail because we could spend hours here. But Joseph was the one of 12 brothers. He was the favored son of his father, Israel. And he has a dream. He goes to his brothers, tells them, I have a dream. He has no idea what that looks like. The danger of you knowing the future of your life is you'll screw it up. You'll make it more difficult on yourself now. And some of us want to know, what are you going to do in my life? And if you're not careful, Joseph knows a snapshot of what's going to happen. He don't know when or how, and he runs his mouth about it. He offends his brothers, and his brothers are like, okay, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen. Yep. So he, in essence, doesn't even know how to handle the dream that God gives him. And so he has this dream that he's going to kind of lead or shepherd or be in charge, and his brothers will follow along suit with him. The dream is his brothers bowing down. We see that come to fruition. But here's the people that come into the picture along the way when we're talking about God's purpose. You will always have those that cheer you on. Those that cheer you on. They'll say, man, I believe in you. I got, And so those are good and bad. Because here's what I learned in my life. Someone who cheers you on, let's kind of give you a definition. An enthusiastic vocal supporter of someone. So at the time of this recording, we're getting ready for the UGA's national championship.
Oh, yeah, we are.
2 in a row. We did get lucky.
Prophetically, I hope.
Yeah, we did get lucky. I say lucky. We played probably the worst game of the year and got to this point, hoping we can. We'll all sit around as Georgia fans and cheer for our team to win.
Absolutely, we will.
How much of that is about them and how much of that is about us? It's about us. I want them to win because it makes me feel good. I don't know any of those guys. And can I be honest with you? I love them in the love of Jesus, I guess. But I don't care what happens in the future. I don't. Right. Oh, wait. I mean, I think about last year. George Pickens, he's a great receiver. He's turning into a pretty dang good receiver in the NFL. But am I following George Pickens anymore? No, because he's not a part of my team. It's about me.
Yeah.
So those that cheer us on many times are about us. I heard somebody say this one time. Those that deify will one day crucify. My biggest cheerleaders in my life, that I shouldn't say some of the biggest cheerleaders in my life, because you have good people and bad people in this, were very much cheering me on for what they could get from me.
Wow.
And you know some of those stories. You've seen some of that.
Absolutely.
It was not that they cared about me. It was what they cared about. They wanted to be close to me. They wanted to cheer me on. They wanted to stroke my ego. They wanted to make me feel good. They wanted to
say,
if
you succeeded, they'd succeed.
If I succeed, they succeed. Mm-hmm. If they succeed, something happens good for me. Mm-hmm. If I validate them, maybe I'll get validation back. And this is what happened in Joseph's life. It says he was the favorite son of Israel, and he had been born to Israel in his old age, and Joseph was the favorite son. And so Israel, his father, made him an ornate robe. He was his favorite. He cheered him on. Mm-hmm. He loved him more. But listen, why did he do it? It was because he was born in his old age.
Had nothing to do with Joseph. Had everything to do with Israel.
Did it mean he didn't love him? No. Did it mean he didn't care about him? No.
Yeah.
But there was still some selfishness there. Mm-hmm. I mean, here's a godly man who still goes, oh, you were born in my old age. I love you more. So it's still somewhat self-serving. And so at the end of the day, you'll have those fans that cheer you on along the way. And so many of those fans, though, are very egocentric. So here's a second one. Those who critique you or criticize you. I'll use that word. In my notes is that critique is more often criticism. So this is those, let's stick with the theme of football. Coming off of the college football playoff, I'm telling you, man, I wasn't the Monday morning quarterback. I was the second quarterback. Like I was in that. What are we doing? Why we just run this play? And so I remember going, if we'll just run this play, and then they would run a play later. I said, I told you what. Like that's
sounds
me.
Like you.
Yeah, it sounds just like me. It is me. And so, but the reality is, like I have my opinions, and that's okay. And we can all cheer. Yeah, we can all cheer along the way and have fun. But I'm not talking about people who just have. I'm talking about people who like go, why do you do that? Like we get emails and stuff all the time, and I don't respond. Very rarely do I respond. And if I do respond, it's usually me responding to something that I'm owning and standing firm on, not just responding to stupid criticisms. And the reality here is that there's so many people who have opinions about your calling for your life, about your purpose for your life. Well, why you do this is this. And as a pastor, I'm just going to tell you, the more my influence has grown, the more people have criticized and said things and have no idea what it took. Never put on clown makeup.
Wow.
But act like a clown every day. your
good.
clown comments, but you never were willing to put on the clown makeup. And so I didn't get here overnight going, well, I think this is a good idea. You didn't get here. Like, we recently moved our student ministry from Wednesday to Sunday. Yep. We caught some flack from that.
Absolutely.
That was not I want more time with my family on Wednesday. That's not what that was.
That was a 12-month decision.
Very intentional process going, how do we disciple students along the way? And I'm not being mean, but we got to be very careful how we criticize things that are bathed in prayer. We seek wisdom in a multitude of counsel. You're trying as a student pastor to fulfill your purpose, live out God's calling, help students fulfill their purpose and live out God's calling. And guess what? Critics come.
Yep.
But many times those critics won't put on the clown makeup. You shared going to the camp and working the camp last summer, or when you were a child, at our last episode, when you were a teenager, and how that led to God's. Most people wouldn't do that for free.
Yeah.
You know how I know? Because they only serve when it's convenient. They'll sign up and not show up. They complain, but they don't give.
What's in it for me?
It's all, and so those are the critics. Think about his brothers. It says in Genesis 37:4-8. I won't read the whole thing. His brothers noticed that the father loved him. There was jealousy. They felt like they put a target on his back because they saw favor, and they saw the future, the dreams that Joseph shared, and they're like, we don't want to bow down to our brother. And so it says they hated him all the more. And then he told them to dream again, and they're like, what in the world? And so it says, do you intend to reign over us? Verse 8. Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. What was his dream? God's purpose. They hated him, and they were going to destroy it, and they were criticized. And so here's what rarely am I criticized. Occasionally it happens, and when it does happen, I look at it as constructive criticism, not just blatant, throwing me under the bus. I've never been criticized, or rarely been criticized by someone who's done more than me.
Wow.
Like I don't look around at people who are just trying to go that. It's a whole lot easier to look at somebody who's done more. And we're guilty of this. Look at people who maybe bigger platforms, bigger followings, bigger, and you're like, well, I wouldn't do it that way because.
Right.
Or I think they should do.
If you're running a race, you're not criticizing the person running behind you.
That's exactly right.
You're focused on where you're going.
And that actually is biblical too, in the sense of like, we run to win the prize.
Yes, exactly.
That's what Paul tells us. We run to win the prize, as if we're the only one that can win. So we're gonna try to So we're running our race. We're not running. And so I think there's a difference in criticism and legitimate concern or feedback. Yeah. And you have to determine who are the people in your life that you're going to put in place that you're going to allow to give you, constructive criticism. Yeah. And so I have people in my life. There's elders in my life. There's outside coach. I pay people to tell me the truth. And so
I'll tell you for free.
Yeah. But here's the thing. If I'm paying you and I have a contract to pay you, can say anything you want to me.
That's true.
I pay guys that are way further along, big on bigger platforms. Yep. I talked to a guy yesterday, and he said, in 40 years of ministry, guy who pastored a church of 12,000, handed off to another pastor who's my age. The church is now 17,000 underneath. That's what's happening. Guys in their 40s are going to these churches, and I'm like, this is my home. This is where I want to be for the rest of my life. This is, but I need people that are pouring in my life. And so I've paid this guy to come in and tell me the truth about everything. Speaking in my life, I'm paying you to criticize me because I trust you. You've been there. You're further along than me. You've done more than me.
That's wise.
I'm not going to listen to some 22-year-old or some 45-year-old who's barely in church on Sundays, and they want to tell us they're not doing anything for the kingdom, but they want to tell you how to run the church and want to tell you how to live your life. And
criticism often comes from people don't understand. It doesn't make sense to them. Why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. And God's purpose isn't going to make sense to everybody.
Yeah.
Obedience doesn't always make sense. You just trust the process, and you're obedient, and you keep your eyes.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because if something doesn't make sense, I can ask for clarity. If I'm butthurt, I can be critical.
Yeah.
And so, like, you got to ask yourself, this doesn't make sense. Do I need to ask for clarity in that, or do I need to? But if I'm butthurt, I'll make a passive aggressive social media post. Come on, yep. I'll say things. Look, and let me be real candid. People listen to this podcast and they go, is he talking about me? If the Holy Spirit's convicting you, yes. If he's not, no. But at the end of the day, I got nobody in my mind. This is patterns that I see, pastors see, my friends see that are pastors, other pastors that are further along say this has been going on for years. Yep. And so
if the shoe fits,
it's human nature. Don't be one of those people who critique God's calling on other people's lives. Yep. Don't be. Here's the third one. those who accuse you. So if they can't criticize you enough, or they can't pull you down, the enemy can't use somebody to criticize you out of your calling, now the enemy will do what he can to disrupt your character, distort your character, make people think things of you. Now, this is why you have to have boundaries in your life. And so we live in a faultless society. I want to shift blame. And so we see this happening in Joseph's life. He now sees God's plan, the door's opening. He's starting to live out his purpose. He goes from being sold into slavery by his brothers. One of them wanted to kill him. One of them said no. They sell him into slavery. Well, that doesn't feel like God's plan, but he was faithful. He served in the prison cell, or he served in slavery, and now he's in Potiphar's house. And he's eventually going to end up in a prison cell. He's going to be faithful there in serving. He's everywhere he goes, he serves God's purpose where he's at. So he's in Potiphar's house now, who his slave master. He's been favored by Potiphar, and Potiphar says, man, I trust you. You've been faithful. Now you can have anything in my house you want. Just don't touch my wife, which is common sense.
Right.
However, I always say this joke, people laugh.
I know what
we
you're
call her
gonna say.
Potiphar
Oh my
because she
gosh.
got a lust problem.
Can we retire that one now?
Yeah, so it says that Joseph was well-built and handsome, and she had a lust problem. She comes after him, asks him to have sex with her, which he's like, I mean, can you imagine being in that situation? He's like, she's attacked.
What a mess.
What a mess. I'm trying to fulfill God's purpose, and here we go. Now, she accuses him of trying to rape her by stealing his jacket and saying, see, he ran out and I took his jacket. That's not what happened at all. She twisted the truth, accused him of something he didn't do. Now, here's what I want to say. He gets thrown into a prison cell because he's falsely accused. Potiphar believes it, throws him into a prison cell, and now he's back to what? Being faithful in the lowest of low, okay? But here's what I would say to you. You don't have to be guilty. You just have to be accused.
Wow.
So as your influence grows, you say, I want God's plan. I want God's purpose for my life. Just know the bigger your platform gets, the more the accusations come, the more your family's under critique. And my wife said this last year, 2022 was the hardest ministry year of our life because stupid people said stupid things.
Gosh.
Untrue things.
Yeah.
And it was hurtful. But you know what? Jesus gives us an example there. Every time Jesus was accused of doing something he did not do, he remained quiet. The only time Jesus responded was when they said, are you the Son of Man? And he said, that which you state is true. And so at the end of the day, sometimes you're on a platform, you're living out God's purpose. He was in Potiphar's house, and the accusations came, and he ran with it. He said, okay, whatever. I'm not here for the approval of others. I'm here for the approval of God.
Yeah. That's great. So I think so many people feel like they have to give a response. I've been accused. You've said this. You've criticized that. I have to give you a response. And I remember the first time I read that in Scripture when Jesus was being beaten and they were questioning him and taunting him, and it says Jesus remained silent. And that gave me permission I don't have to give everyone a response. Yeah. I'm doing my thing. I'll respond when necessary. But not every critique, not every criticism needs a response from me.
Yeah, and this is the mature thing. This is maturity for me. We'll say things like, you can send us hate mail. We say that because we don't care. We just, not that we want you to send it. I just don't care. I'm not going to respond because Jesus wouldn't. Now, there are people. Let me refer back. There are people in your life that have to have the ability to speak into your life and challenge you. And you know what? When there are accusations made or there are critiques made or people are doing or hurting, those are the people I run to and say, hey, do you see this in my life? Help me now. How do I respond to this? Yeah. And I think all of us need those people in our lives. And so if you're 25, you need those people. I know one of the things we're doing with our church this year as we push forward in this last point is this. You need four. This is the fourth type of person in your life. And these are the types of people you need to surround yourself with. Those who encourage and empower you. Encouragement, though, encourage you to do better, encourage you when you're doing well, right?
Yes.
And so this is where somebody has to hand you the ball and say, go score. I believe in you. But they also have to say, this is the play you need to run. or, hey, you shouldn't have ran it that way. They got to be coaching you along the way. Right. And so in those situations, in Joseph's life, he had a butler and now a baker in prison. He, tells him a dream. God uses him, and they're like, hey, wait. He now finds himself in Pharaoh's palace because of his faithfulness in the prison. He had those people that encouraged him. He goes to Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh encourages him and empowers him to lead, second most powerful man in the whole, in all of Egypt. And so now he has people around him that have inspired him, encouraged him, empowered him. And this is where, no matter where you're at in your life, you need those people. Here's how, if you're a partner of Relevant Church or you attend Relevant Church, here's how this plays itself out. We have new groups launching that we've been talking about all month long. You need to be in a group. I'm not Sundays and Wednesday groups that are opportunities to be a part of that. So the whole purpose here is to put the right people around you to empower you and encourage you. So in conclusion, here's what I would say. Be careful the voices you listen to. All right? Be careful the voices you listen to. You need the right people in your life. Second is this. Be careful the stories you tell. So here's the interesting thing. Joseph shared a dream that if he kept quiet, you wonder if he'd had to go through some of the stuff that he went through. But he told the story. But you know what Joseph didn't do? For the next 13 years before he started into Pharaoh's palace, and then 7 years later, 20 years before he actually fulfills his purpose here, he didn't tell all the bad things that happened. Oh, I just want to tell you, when I was in prison and Potiphar. That's not what you hear. You hear Joseph was found favor with God and others. Joseph found favor with God.
That's good.
He didn't tell all the victim stories. Listen, when I preach on Sunday mornings, my goal is not to tell everything's gone wrong and everything's there. My goal is to preach the gospel. Yeah. Even in this podcast, we take, 1 minute to say, hey, here's an example of how this might play itself out, but we're not telling all the victim stories. We're telling the faithfulness of God in all of that. So be careful of the people you listen to and be careful of the stories you tell. So we gave you more than 3. Yep. We gave you 4 today of the types of people, and then we gave you 2 takeaways. So that's 6 divided by 3. Divided by 2 is 3.
Oh, there we go. We ended with 3.
There you go. So listen, if you like this podcast, give us a review. The more you review it, the better it is for us. We have it on Apple Podcasts, Old School iTunes. You make fun of me of that. Spotify, Google Play, and YouTube. Yep. And we love that you'll tune in and listen. And hopefully this is helping you. We want to serve you better as we continue the conversation in our next episode about purpose. God bless you.